In the year 2018, this ACM Alan Turing Award has been given to these three scientists, Yoshua Bengio, Jeff Hinton, and Jan LeCun. This Alan Turing Award is considered equivalent to the Nobel Prize for Computer Science. So that's the status of this particular award. And even though this award has been finalized for year 2018, but it is given to them essentially in 2019. But the award year is essentially based as 2018. And if you look at who all received this particular award, it's all these three scientists. They were pioneers in the domain of machine learning. And to be more specific, they did pioneered in the domain of deep learning. And among these three people, Jeff Hinton is considered the father of artificial neural network itself. So they all have done significant contribution in advancing the artificial neural network domain. So the artificial neural network is currently popularly known as deep learning, but it's all the same thing. It's a new manifestation name. Even though they all hold academic positions, like Yoshua Bengio is from University of Montreal, Jeff Hinton from University of Toronto, both are from Canada, and Jan LeCun is from New York University.
Excuse me, sir.
Hold positions in industries. So Jan LeCun is currently the director of Facebook's artificial intelligence group. Jeff Hinton is heading Google's artificial intelligence group. Yoshua Bengio has his own startup specifically focusing in AI applications. So the recent trends are in the domain of deep neural networks. So I just wanted to give you some brief highlights of the state-of-the-art results achieved using the machine learning techniques, especially the deep learning technique. So the deep learning revolution happened especially in 2012, and from that time onwards, there has been a humongous progress in the domain of deep learning. It all started, we can say, from this specific large-scale competition, which is referred to as the ImageNet classification competition. And this was conducted every year, and people from computer vision domain, they used to submit their algorithms for classifying the images. The problem statement is like you have around 1.2 million images for training, and there are 1,000 different classes. So your task is to assign a class label for every individual input. So maybe if you give cat's images input, then the algorithm should say it is a cat and so forth. So that's what essentially that classification problem that we are saying about. So in the year 2010, 2011, the error rate were something around 28 or 26% error rate. So that's a very high error rate essentially. But in 2012, there was a significant jump in the error rate. So the other way of looking at it is the accuracy increased or the error decreased. So now it was a significant jump from 26% to 16% in the year 2012. And that's where actually the deep learning revolution happened. So in this particular year, the algorithm which was submitted was performing extraordinarily well. Then people started to look at, okay, what is the base? So how did this happen? So that's when they realized a deep learning based convolutional neural network has been submitted to this competition, and it won by a great margin. And all high profile research labs and industries started focusing on deep learning. They pulled in a lot of money to uh, uh, further the research in deep learning domain. And from 2012 onwards, we even see there is a significant progress in the classification accuracy as the years progress. And you can see like around 2015 or 16, it is almost considered like the algorithms surpass the human error as well. So we have almost achieved a very good accuracy. So this is sort of a revolutionary point from the machine learning point of view, especially for the deep learning technique. So deep learning is one type of machine learning technique. So that is an important point to keep in mind. So we also have other statistical approaches like support vector machine is one example. So that's not especially a deep learning technique. Or we have bagging or boosting techniques. So those are some concepts that we will be discussing in the tomorrow's lectures. What I wanted to say is that all these different techniques put together, we collectively call them as machine learning techniques. So here is a brief milestone of various improvements that happened in terms of deep learning revolution for computer vision. I will be anyway sharing the condensed format of these slides. So don't worry about if you couldn't actually go through it. So you can go through it later. So we'll share the slides later. So that was the initial deep learning revolution. And another level of deep learning revolution happened very recently, which is referred to as AlphaFold 2. Even in the last week, this DeepMind open sourced the code for AlphaFold 2. So this is another revolutionary moment for machine learning. And what did AlphaFold 2 does is that it is trying to solve an important problem in life science. So what it does is that it takes an one-dimensional sequence of amino acids, and then it predicts a three-dimensional protein structure folding. Predicting that 3D protein structure folding from one-dimensional amino acid sequence is not considered a simple problem. It's an extremely difficult and challenging problem. And another ImageNet moment happened where DeepMind was able to come up with a deep learning model that gave extraordinary performance, say like something close to 90% accuracy in terms of predicting the protein 3D structure. So that is considered a significant moment, and you can see how machine learning techniques are giving contributions even in the domains that are apart from information technology. So here it is actually solving an important problem of life science. So what we have to see is that even as in the introduction part, when the professor was mentioning about how machine learning is important in various different domains. So here is one example where we actually see machine learning has made some extraordinary contribution in solving some difficult problems. Another important milestone that deep learning has achieved is, so this DeepMind is part of Google's research. So this is a subsidiary of Google. There is another company called OpenAI, which is also pioneering in the domain of artificial intelligence. It's a for-profit company in US. They recently came up with a language model called GPT-3. So GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformers. So there are different versions. So this is version 3. And this version 3 is considered to be one of the state of the art in the language prediction model. So it's based on a very advanced deep learning architecture called transformers. So transformer is currently the state of the art in deep learning. But if you wanted to understand about transformers, there are a lot of prerequisite things to be learned. And I hope that this mathematics for machine learning, this entire workshop will give you a very good base to explore further into advanced machine learning techniques. So the model's performance was so good that Microsoft decided to license this particular GPT-3, and they have actually bought this GPT-3 from OpenAI. One downside to this state-of-the-art model is that the number of parameters that this particular deep learning model uses is something in the range of 175 billion parameters. So that is significantly large. So one billion we can say like 100 crores. So it is 175 billion parameters. That is rare. So that is the trend we see, that when you reach towards best performing machine learning models, the number of parameters is also exponentially increasing. And there are also research lines which is specifically referred to as distillation, model distillation, where you try to come up with models with less number of parameters, but that matches the accuracy of the state of the art result. That's also an interesting line of research work that if you are into PhD, looking for some interesting PhD problems, that will be a very nice domain to work about distillation of models. So just for comparison, uh, the GPT-3 is considered one of the biggest model, and it has 175 billion parameters as compared to its previous version, which was GPT version 2, which contained only 1.5 billion parameters, or you can say 150 crore parameters. But you can see GPT-3 is 175 billion parameters. And what is the effect of this? The thing is that the language model, so the intuition behind this is that, given looking at some previous words, this GPT-3 predicts what should be the next word that best fits the particular sequence. By predicting the next word and next word, you can actually generate a huge text of body. So what happens is that the GPT-3 generates text that looks like it has been actually written by a human, but it is not actually written by a human, but it was synthetically generated by a deep learning model. So what here happens is that we just start it with some initial text like dear human philosopher. So whatever is in the blue, that was human fed, and everything else is automatically generated by the GPT-3 model, and it is very much realistic. There are a lot of uh, downside to this as well, as in the case that people can misuse such models. But that is related with the ethical use of any technology. So we have to be careful about how we ethically use the technology and tools. So this is one important type of contribution or state-of-the-art result achieved by OpenAI. And soon after, they also came up with another significant application, another state-of-the-art, which is referred to as DAL-E. And what we saw previously was that this is in the domain of natural language processing. Specifically, we do text processing. So in natural language processing, we can also include speech processing. That is a different subdomain. But this is what we usually see, is that we have domains, that is natural language processing, or we have domains such as computer vision, and we have models and problems. We solve problems specific to those domains, and very rarely people do multi-modal uh, problems. What it means is that, can you combine both computer vision and natural language processing? So what is the use case, or what kind of applications that you can build? And in that sort of a multimodal architecture, so DAL-E is currently the state of the art. So what DAL-E does, so it is a combination of both NLP, text-based NLP, as well as computer vision. And what it does is that, if you just give a caption or a text as input to this DAL-E, it synthetically generates images that best describes the text that you have given. Say, for example, so here I am citing this particular example, an armchair in the shape of an avocado. So what happens is that it synthetically generates images of chair that resemble something like the avocado fruit. The interesting fact is that such images were never part of the training for this model. It never saw such images previously, but it can synthetically generate images that best suits the text description that you give as input. So this is the multimodality that we are discussing about, combining both text as well as images. So this is considered another important milestone in the domain of artificial intelligence. And to highlight all these models that I have shown, they all takes transformer as the base deep learning architecture. So I highly recommend that anyone who is currently into serious deep learning research need to consider to use transformers and many of its variants in their research work. So now, so that is a high level briefing about artificial intelligence domain. So now, coming to machine learning, uh, I also wanted to just tell you one relationship between or how do you distinguish between artificial intelligence and machine learning? So by artificial intelligence, the simplest way of understanding it is some sort of automation. That's what we try to achieve using artificial intelligence. And what are we trying to automate? We are trying to automate some aspects or tasks that we humans are really good at. So that's what essentially artificial intelligence is all about. Building some softwares or some applications that is trying to automate the tasks that humans are good at. This is all about artificial intelligence. And now the question is, okay, if that is about artificial intelligence is all about automation, then how do we achieve that automation? So what tool we should use to build such automation? And one of the answer is you can use machine learning techniques to build such automations, or you can build AI applications using machine learning techniques. So that is how you should understand the relationship between artificial intelligence and machine learning. So now, what is the intuition behind machine learning? What it does? The machine learning is all about deriving some useful information from data. So this is an important aspect to remember. And whenever it comes to machine learning, data is very important. Previously, the machine learning domain has been very synonymously been referred to as statistical learning. So you can say either machine learning, or you can just say it like statistical learning. It all best suits it. So when it comes to statistics, so we can think what is important when we wanted to think about a statistics. Even if you wanted to do some simple descriptive statistics like find the average, or find the minimum or maximum, or find the standard deviation, or find the median, and so forth. To achieve all those, what we need is data. So without data, how can we find an average, or how can we find the minimum, maximum, or quartile informations, and so forth, or standard deviation? It is not possible. So data is vital when you wanted to perform statistical learning. So, so the similar logic is there. So data is important when we wanted to do machine learning. And what it is trying to do, it is trying to derive some useful information. So now we can ask, okay, what does that useful information looks like? What is that useful information? So that changes according to the context, and that is the kind of intuition that I wanted to bring in by saying what is that useful information that we are deriving from data. And in the last introduction, the professor was also talking about four different domains of machine learning. So that's what I also wanted to briefly highlight here. Say, for example, you can think of some machine learning applications like you wanted to predict the height of a participant by just looking at the weight and age, by analyzing the weight and age of the participant. Is it possible to predict their height? So it sounds like a very interesting problem, but then we can ask, is it actually solvable? Can we actually predict height from the weight and age information? The answer is to a certain extent we can, but to do that we need some data uh, based on which we can actually come up with a model that can predict the height by looking at the weight and age. And predicting height is a continuous value, because height of a person is a continuous value. By continuous value, I mean to say the height can be 162 centimeters, or 158.3 centimeters, or 60.02 centimeters, and so forth. So this is what I mean by continuous value. So whenever a machine learning model is predicting such continuous values, we call such models as regression models, if the output value is a continuous value. And now we can ask, are there problems where the output value is not continuous, but only discrete finite possible values? And the answer is yes. So such type of problems also exist. One of the example is like spams. So given an email, you can say whether it is a spam mail or a non-spam mail. So there are only two possible output values. So it is a finite discrete possible outputs. There are only two possible outputs. Either the output says it is a spam, or it says it is not a spam. So such kind of problems where the output is finite discrete possible values, we call them as classification problems. And regression and classification are very closely related problems as well. So you can sort of quickly transform a regression problem into classification problem. The other way around is not that easy, but at least they have very close relationship. So other kind of problems can be like we see applications where you purchase some product from some online portal like Amazon. So when you purchase one particular product, it will populate you with a lot of recommendations. Like you might be interested in certain other products. So what kind of machine learning algorithms that is employed at the backend to make such recommendations? So we use a technique called clustering. So it tries to group together data which shares some sort of similarities, and that property is used to make recommendations. And the other kind of problem is the dimensionality reduction. So we might in practice be using data that is of multidimensional. That means we might be using several features for a specific problem, and each feature is referred to as a dimension. So if you are dealing with some 10 attributes for a specific problem, then it is a 10-dimensional data. If you just come back to this particular problem and say that based on weight and age, you want to predict height, the weight and age are attributes or two features. So you can also refer to them as two dimensions. Weight is a dimension, age is a dimension. So that's what we mean by dimension in machine learning. So it is essentially the features. And all these data are numeric, so we can also visualize them as a graph. But when it comes to visualization, we have a limitation, like beyond 3 dimension, we cannot visualize. But our data can be 10-dimensional data, or it can be a 30-dimensional data. Then how can we visualize them? So there are some strategies by which we reduce the dimension by retaining all the useful information from all the dimensions. So that is specifically referred to as dimensionality reduction. It's one of the primary uses to visualize the data. And another use case is that you can reduce the complexity of your problem as well. So one of the very prominent technique used in dimensionality reduction is called principal component analysis, using which you can reduce the complexity of your problem, as well as you can use that for visualization as well. It's a projection-based technique. There are also other visualization techniques like manifold-based technique called TSNE, which is also used for visualization, but not very useful in terms of reducing the complexity of the problem. So that is the reason why PCA is a very significant technique. And on the last days of the session, we will be discussing about dimensionality reduction, the important concepts of dimensionality reduction as well. So these are the broader classifications, and any machine learning problem that you pick, you can put it in one of these, or you can put it like a combination of these. So that's the brief introduction to machine learning. And from a programming point of view, how can we understand machine learning? So that is another important intuition that we should gain. So we all are familiar with the machine learning or programming paradigms, that if you have a problem statement, we come up with an algorithm to solve that problem, and then we give our input. Our input goes through the algorithm and we get an output. So this is what we all are familiar with. But there is a small change when it comes to a machine learning based programming paradigm. And what happens here is that the machine learning techniques are going to generate the algorithms by looking at the data. So typically we sit and think about an algorithm, and then we feed the input and get the output. But when it comes to machine learning, that is not the case. So we have different machine learning tools or techniques, and those techniques are going to generate algorithms. So that's a very interesting intuition to think about. And those algorithms doesn't look like the pseudocode or something that can be quickly written in a C language, but that looks something different. And what kind of an algorithm machine learning generates by looking at the data is something that we need to understand. So when it comes to machine learning, what happens is that there is an input and output involved in the final stage. And for given this input, what happens is that this input is transformed to the desired output. So this is an important part, or the intuition that we should all consider. Some sort of transformation is applied or happens to the input such that we get our desired output. So now the question is, how do we obtain these transformations? So these transformations is essentially what we call as algorithm that is automatically generated by the machine learning technique. So how does this algorithm is generated? It is generated by looking at the data. So initially we said like machine learning is all about deriving some useful information from the data, and that information is nothing but these transformations that are derived from these data. And what those transformations do, it transforms our input to our desired output. So I will associate that with all the four types of classes of machine learning that we previously looked at, like what you mean by regression, classification, clustering, and dimensionality reduction. So let's take an example where we wanted to predict the height of the participant by looking at the weight, age, and gender. So this is a three-dimensional data because we are dealing with three attributes. And what happens here in the transformation part is that we are going to find some, so we have some variables. Let us call these variables C0, C1, C2, and C3. So all these variables should hold some values. And these weight, age, and gender, they all need to be numeric. The weight and age are numeric. Gender information, say for example, we consider two gender, then we can just make a male and female. We can just have a numeric representation called 0 or 1, or you can call it 1 and 2. So you have a numeric representations. So machine learning models can only take numbers as input and give numbers as output. So that's an important thing to remember. So what these transformations does is that it takes this set of numbers, applies some transformations to them, and then it obtains the output. That is our desired output. So weight, age, and gender information can be transformed to height information with the appropriate values that you choose for C0, C1, C2, and C3. And this summation that I am showing here, you can think of it like a particular transformation operation. Yes. So what kind of transformation it do? So again, the transformation can look like you take this C0 and then you multiply C1 with weight, and then you multiply C2 with age, you multiply C3 with gender, you just sum them up, and that should give us the height of the participant, given the weight, age, and gender. So this is the kind of transformation that we are obtaining. So finding the best value for C0, C1, C2, and C3, such that when you apply this transformation, you get the height is the main task of machine learning technique. So now we can ask the question, how do we find the best values for C0, C1, C2, C3, and so forth? So one of the most prominent technique used in machine learning to find the best values for C0, C1, C2, and so forth is referred to as gradient descent. And we will also be looking at that concept in the forthcoming lecture. But to get a brief overview, using gradient descent approaches, we can find best values for these variables that applies a reasonably good transformation of the site. So we then now the question is, what do you mean by best variable? How do you define the best? The best here means that when you transform these input to the height information, the output height and the actual height of the participant should not differ too much. If it doesn't differ too much, then we say the transformation is best. So that is something we call it as our objective. So the difference between the predicted height and the actual height should not vary much. So the difference should be very less. That means that difference we can call it as an error in making the prediction of the height. So we need to minimize that error. So when we use gradient descent technique to find the best values, we have an objective that the predicted error, that means the difference between the predicted height and the actual height should be as small as possible. If we get 0, that is the ideal case, but it is never possible to get such 0 error. But what we can do the best is minimize the error. So that's what we'll be trying to do. So since the height prediction is a continuous value, we refer to that as a regression problem. So similar kind of transformation. So these transformations are learned from the data. So you can say, for example, we have 100 participants in this particular FTP. So we collect the weight, age, gender, and height information from all the 100 participants. So that is our data repository. And from that, we would take a part of that, say for example, 80% of the data, we take it, and using that 80% data, we try to find the best value for C0, C1, C2, and C3. And that data that we take to find these best values is usually referred to as training data. So we can take 80% of the data for training. By training, what do we mean? Based on which we find the best values for these variables, transformation variables or transformation parameters. And you can evaluate how good these using the remaining 20%, and that remaining 20% is referred to as testing data. So this is the brief intuition that we should keep in our mind. When it comes to statistical or classical machine learning, these variables C0, C1, C2, etc. will be usually denoted as theta 0, theta 1, theta 2, and so forth. They are referred to as model parameters. When it comes to artificial neural network or deep learning, these variables will be referred to as W0, W1, W2, and so forth, like weight parameters. It's only the matter of how you call it, whether you refer it with theta 0, theta 1, or you call it as W0, W1, doesn't matter. What it essentially does is the transformations. So here we see one level of transformations. If we do multiple levels of transformations, then we are entering into deep learning. So that is the only difference. So it is not restricted to one level of transformations. We can even have multiple levels of transformations. As the level increases, we are having very deeper levels of representation learning, which we refer to as deep learning as well. But the intuition is essentially the same. So these are the very intuitive insight that we should keep in our mind. So no matter whether we deal with statistical machine learning or deep learning, the intuition about transformations should be in our mind. A similar problem where the output is a discrete possible output, like you give an email as input, and we need to find some transformation parameters that eventually tells whether the input is a spam mail or a non-spam mail. So non-spam is usually referred to as spam. So what email is a text, or it can be paragraphs. So how does that goes as input can come to our mind? Such a question can come to our mind. So what we usually do is that we will do some pre-processing to the text data that we get, and we do some intermediate transformations and represent them as a numeric representations. Like on quick example is some unique words. We only pick some unique words from the email, and that represents as features. And every word we can have a mapping to an integer number, and that integer number can go as input, and it can undergo some transformations. We can even go through multiple levels of transformations and finally say whether it is a spam mail or a non-spam mail. If the output is a discrete possible output, it is a classification problem. So a similar level of transformations, you can multiply them up and sum it up, and then the summed up result can go through another level of transformation and so forth. So this sigma that I have mentioned here, it is referred to as a sigmoid transformation or activation function, which we will be discussing in the later classes. But when we get into that, if we have this intuition, it will be very easier for you to grasp different machine learning tools or techniques. So coming to clustering, so what we will try to do is, let's say for example, x1, x2, x3, x4 are 4 different samples, and we might need to group together samples that share some similarity. So maybe, for example, one of the very popular technique is called k-means clustering. So maybe you wanted to group it as 2 different clusters which shares similar interests. So you might be ending up with 2 mean values that helps in grouping together the data. And say, for example, x1, x3, and x4, they all share some similarity. So we assign a label 0 to all those samples that share similarity, and x2 is another sample, so that is different from x1, x2, and x3, so we assign a different label to that. So such kind of problems are called as clustering, and we can use, there are a lot of interesting applications for clustering, and one of the example we saw is to provide recommendations. So from this you can say x1, x3, and x4 are people who are very much interested in listening to old songs, say for example from YouTube. And the clustering approach can keep track of what all types of old songs that people x1, x3, and x4 listen to. And when a new person listen to one of the old song, then YouTube can give us recommendations based on the watching habit of x1, x3, and x4 for the new person who is watching a movie. So these are some example of recommendation systems using clustering. So another type of machine learning is dimensionality reduction. Say, for example, you have multiple dimensions. So think of these as different dimensions like weight information, age information, gender information, some demographic information, and so forth. So these are different attributes. And maybe instead of dealing with 4 different attributes, you need to come up with some compressed representation of 4 attributes as a 2 attribute representation. So you can sort of look at some eigen vectors corresponding to these data, and you can sort of project these data into those eigenvectors, and you can reduce the dimensionality as well. So these are some brief intuitions that I want to give you, so that you can even reduce the dimension. 4-dimensional data can be reduced into 2 dimensions by doing some eigen analysis. So this is what the core of principal component analysis as well. So these comprises the essential summary of machine learning categories, different types of machine learning problems. So as a quick summary, so there are 4 types of machine learning problems: regression, classification, clustering, and dimensionality reduction. And we talked about finding transformation parameters. So when you wanted to find transformation parameters for regression and classification, we have some objective like minimizing the error in the prediction, because we actually know what is the true height of a person, or if given a mail, if you know actually whether it is a spam mail or a non-spam mail, then we can evaluate our model based on its prediction accuracy. So if you already know the ground truth or the actual label of the data, then we can actually optimize it using the gradient descent techniques. So the regression and classification, to find those best transformation parameters, we need labeled data. Then only we can actually come up with the best transformation parameters. And such kind of problems are referred to as supervised learning, because you need labeled data to find the best transformation parameters, which minimizes the prediction error. But when it comes to clustering and dimensionality reduction, we are not actually interested in the estimating the prediction accuracy by comparing it to some actual values. So we need not necessarily require labeled data. So clustering and dimensionality reduction need not necessarily require labeled data. So such kind of problems are referred to as unsupervised learning problems. So this is a brief summary about different types of machine learning problems and how they are even grouped under supervised and unsupervised category. And you can even have some more finer aspects like semi-supervised learning, and then go to another entirely different paradigm called reinforcement learning and so forth. But to start with, you should have a good insight regarding what these kind of categories are, and then you can progress towards other types. So these are some brief insights about machine learning. And coming to how do we actually implement it? So what are the tools that we can make use of to actually build some machine learning applications, or how do we train the models and so forth? So when it comes to the practicals of machine learning, so one of the very prominent language in machine learning domain is Python. So there are other tools that are prominent in machine learning. Say for example, R is a very wonderful statistical package, but R has its limitations in the sense that It is not a general purpose programming language like Python, but for statistical analysis, it is extremely good. But since Python is more generic and there are a lot of uh, third-party libraries that are available for scientific computing, say for example, NumPy, Matplotlib, SciPy, Pandas. These are some very significant third-party libraries that are used in machine learning. And another tool called scikit-learn, which is a very popular statistical machine learning toolkit that is used to solve many interesting machine learning problems. Especially from the statistical point of view, all the regression, classification, clustering, and dimensionality reduction problems can be solved using these scikit-learn. And in our lecture, we will be looking at scikit-learn library as well. And so these are some statistical analysis tools. And if you are seriously getting into deep learning based research, and there were several deep learning tools that were popular, but currently there are two prominent deep learning tools libraries, which is called PyTorch and TensorFlow. So PyTorch is maintained and released by Facebook, and TensorFlow is maintained and released by Google Research. And uh, when it comes to academic research, there is no choice. One has to be proficient with using both PyTorch as well as TensorFlow. But based on my experience, my recommendation is that start with TensorFlow and then you can switch to PyTorch if you're very new to machine learning. And that will give you a very good transition. The learning curve for PyTorch is a bit higher, and for TensorFlow there are very user-friendly high-level APIs like Keras, which is very easy to construct the deep learning networks and so forth. So these are high recommendations. So if you wanted to do some significant practical applications or do high-end research in machine learning line, so if we ask what are the practical aspects or what kind of proficiency I should have to do some practical experiments in machine learning domain, so you should have very good proficiency in Python. See, so there are, you might have some licensed version of MATLAB where you can also do deep learning based research work. But if you look at where do you get a humongous amount of community support, then in that case, it's either PyTorch or TensorFlow as compared against MATLAB. But there is nothing wrong in using all those. But if you are looking at good community support as well as many research labs, they make their research code available either in PyTorch or in TensorFlow. So if you wanted to take up that and work on top of it, then you should be familiar with PyTorch and TensorFlow. It's very rarely we see some code which is written in MATLAB that is available in GitHub as part of a research paper. But it is highly likely to see PyTorch code or TensorFlow code associated with the research paper, which as a researcher, you can take it up, run the base implementation, and then think about how you can improve it or modify it so that you can bring in or introduce some other novelty into an already existing research work. So my suggestion is that you have to be familiar with Python fundamentals. Then you have to be familiar with the other scientific libraries like numerical Python, which bases a lot of numerical computation implementations available as a package. And then you should be familiar with Matplotlib, which is a visualization library. And then you have to be proficient with Pandas. So Pandas stands for Panel Data Structure, which is a data analytics library, which is the very popular data analytics library as of now. And then you need to be proficient with scikit-learn, which is predominantly for statistical machine learning, but there are also very optimized data pre-processing functionalities available in scikit-learn. So even if you are focusing more on deep learning based research, you might still need to use some functionalities from scikit-learn. So this will become like a part and parcel of any machine learning research work that you would see. And then I highly recommend you to start with TensorFlow, become proficient with the paradigms of deep learning based architecture building and optimizations, and then you can also quickly adapt to PyTorch as well. And coming to what kind of scientific environment we should use for all these hands-on or for implementations. So the most prominent scientific virtual environment used is called Conda scientific environment. And this Conda environment can be installed in your desktop, workstation, or laptop using two utilities. Either you can use Anaconda or you can use Miniconda. So Miniconda is a lightweight version of Anaconda. Anaconda is a bit heavy. It installs a lot of third-party libraries that you may never use at all. So it eats up a lot of your disk space. So my recommendation is, if you wanted to configure your own scientific computing environment for machine learning research, you should look at instructions for how to install Miniconda, which is a very base installation. It doesn't take up much space. And then you can customize. You can install only those libraries that you want for your research. So that doesn't host a lot of unwanted libraries and look after their updates and so forth. So if you wanted to do this, you can use the base for scientific environment. And the most popular programming IDE for machine learning research is the Jupyter Notebook. So this is a browser-based IDE which connects to all the scientific libraries that are available in your scientific environment called Conda. So Jupyter connects to this backend. So this is sort of a front end, and the Conda environment becomes your backend, and you execute your programs from Jupyter, and it connects to Conda and runs the program and runs all your experiments and so forth. So this is what typically we would do in a research lab. But if you don't, but there is a little bit of an effort to configure all these scientific environments properly. Especially when you do it in Windows operating system, there can be some conflicts with paths and you have to resolve them and so forth. But in a Linux environment, it is a bit easier to configure these Conda and these Jupyter environment for your experiments. And now the question, what if I don't want to go through all these struggle to configure the laptop for or your machine for these experiments? Is there any alternative? So one of the best alternative is to use a cloud platform called Google Colab, which is a free scientific cloud platform for running machine learning experiments. So it can do both statistical as well as deep learning based experiments, and it has support for both TensorFlow as well as PyTorch. And you can also have the flexibility to install other libraries that are not available by default. You can also install them explicitly. So there is a lot of advantage of using Google Colab. It's already pre-configured with all these Conda scientific environment. So you get all scientific libraries. And there is also an online version of Jupyter available with Google Colab. So this is an extremely useful beginning stage for machine learning researchers. Everyone who is having a Gmail account can actually get access to the Google Colab and start working on it. So this should be the first point where you should start familiar with the hands-on for machine learning, so for all your experiments. And once you, yeah, even another advantage with Google Colab is that you have free access to GPU. So if you are running some image analysis or computer vision based experiments, so that would mandate a humongous amount of computing because its images are extremely high dimensional data. And if you have GPU, then those kind of computations will be much faster. So if you cannot afford to have your own GPU for your experiments, then the first choice should be to make use of the freely available GPU from the Google Colab. So you can select their GPU and run your experiments on their GPU as well. And they also provide another advanced architecture called TPU. TPU stands for Tensor Processing Unit, that can handle bit more or provides larger memory and can handle more computation than what a GPU can handle. So these all are available for free with Google Colab. But though it is free, there are some restrictions like the memory usage. There are some restrictions, and how long you can run an experiment. There are some restrictions. But this is especially aimed for the educational purpose. And say, for example, if you have a humongous amount of data where you have to run the experiment for several days, then you might need to consider either going for a paid version of Google Cloud, or you should have your own high performance computing facility hosted in your research center. In that case, you can run such humongous experiments. Otherwise, uh, for educational purpose, these Google Colab should be good. Even for developing your prototype of the experiments, you can only take a small subset of your data set and uh, write the prototype of your experiment, and then it's only the matter of scaling it up with your data set, with your humongous data set. Then you need to look at either a high performance computing facility, or you have to subscribe to the Google Cloud Platform, where they charge based on your usage, like how many hours you are connected to it. So they will charge you accordingly.